Hello knitting friends, Valerie here with another stitch tutorial for the Florida Road Trip Mystery Knit Along. This tutorial is for leg 3 and my design specifically, which is these wonderful fountains. Basically what we're going to be doing is we're going to be inserting our needles into specific points in the stockinette stitch background and pulling up loops that are then tacked down into the design later on. So here's how we're going to do it. First things first, let's take a look at the pattern. So I wanted to show you this part in particular because I just took a small section of the chart and also a small section of the photo to kind of show how this all works. First of all, where we pull up the loops, that's the action that's going on here and here. There are no stitches there. We kind of do that between stitches as we're working our way through. So that's why you've got all this gray. That means no stitch. So as you're working across the row, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 stitches in the repeat. Once you pull up the loops, you'll have some additional stitches, but then they disappear once we get to these decreases. Okay, so what are all these weird symbols? Because there are definitely some different ones. This 4-point star here identifies the target stitch. On the very first row of the pattern, we're going to use locking stitch markers to identify this stitch, so that later we know exactly where to insert our needle to pull up a loop. Okay, then you can see here, this is row 5, and then this is row 7. There are arrows. Let me see if I can bring this in a little bit closer here. So these arrows point different directions, and they're all pointing in the direction of the target stitch. So when you get between the first stitch and the second stitch, on row 5, you're going to insert your needle into the target stitch and pull up a loop, which is going to sit on your needle way up here on row 5. Okay, and then you're going to do that again, but this time you're going to go towards the target stitch kind of backwards. It sounds a little weird, but I'm going to show you how to do it. The best way to do this is whatever way is easiest for you. You can use just your knitting needles, or if you want to use a crochet hook, I'm going to show you how to do that too. Here's a look at the bigger pattern, and I just want to show you a couple things because of the way the texture is offset in the different rows. You'll see there's a box here that says work 8 times, and then it's repeated here, and there's not a full box. I gave you a red line here to mark this is another repeat of the pattern. So really you're working this 9 times with some extra stitches at either end. And then when you get to the second repeat of the section, you're still going to work what's in the box 8 times, and your 9th time is kind of split half and half on either side. What does that look like in the actual fabric? You'll see here, let me zoom other way. You'll see here at the edges we have only 2 loops. Oops, only 2 loops pulled up there, rather than there's not one going out to the side, and that's because that repeat is split on either side. Let's start knitting. So here I have my work, and I have worked partway across my row, and I've just knit what is considered the target stitch, the stitch with the 4-point star. So anytime I see that symbol in the chart, I'm going to knit that stitch, and then I'm going to pause, and I am going to use a locking stitch marker. So you just insert that into the leg of your stitch, and then you keep going with your pattern. And pretty much every 8 stitches, you're going to be inserting one of those on the first row. I am going to go ahead and work my 4 rows of stockinette stitch, and then I will be back to show you how we start to draw up loops. The one thing I will note about that stitch marker is when you work back across the row on the other side, you want to make sure that that stitch marker is pushed to the front. I am back. I've done the first 4 rows here in stockinette stitch, and I still have my marker hanging out there in the target stitch, and you can see that is at the front side of the work. And because we pushed it to the front side of the work and made sure that it was in the front side work, that means it's always going to be in the right leg of the target stitch. This is the stitch that we're talking about. Okay, so when it's time to insert our needle and pick up a stitch, we're going to go right in the center there, which is just to the left of the stitch marker. Once I start my repeat, I am going to knit 1 stitch, and now it's time to insert the tip of my needle into the target stitch. Here we go. Wrap your needle around, or wrap your yarn around the needle, and you're going to draw that through the fabric, and it's already on your right hand needle, which is great. You want this to have some slack. You don't want this to be so tight that it's going to scrunch up the fabric here. And what I find is helpful as I work the next stitch, I like to keep, I'm using my thumb here at the front to keep a hold of the loop so that it's not getting too tight. I'm being a little gentle even with the next stitch. They tend to tighten up as you're working. So I'm deliberately trying to be loose on those first 2 stitches that I knit after pulling up the loop. I'm doing 5 stitches, and now it's time to pick up another loop. I don't know about you, but the idea of getting this tip of this needle into this hole, like, that's impossible. So what I do is I use the tip of my left hand needle and I insert that into the fabric and I wrap my yarn around. I'm a little more awkward because I am not left-handed, but I just need to be able to grab that loop of yarn. And now I'm going to put that on my right hand needle. And the same thing applies as I go to knit the next stitch. I want to keep track there so that stays a little bit loose. I'm going to do my seed stitch and then I'll be back with you to show you what we do on the reverse side. Okay, here I am on the reverse side, and you can kind of see where I've been picking up those loops because we've got other kinds of yarn hanging out here on the back. On the back side, or the wrong side of the work, basically what we're going to do every time we come to a place where there's a loop, we're going to slip it. We're going to go ahead and purl across the row, but each time we come to one of those loops, we want to slip it. These loops tend to travel. I'm working on a pretty small swatch right here, so it's staying kind of put, but it can very easily jump over a couple of stitches, just like that one, like I made it do. So you may have to go digging for it. And I tend to turn my work to the so that I can see the front and insert the needle from there. Okay, so I got my loop, and that's exactly where I want it. And now I'm going to keep knitting. I found myself counting the stitches. There are 5 stitches between those loops. So that's what I found myself doing. We're ready here for row 7. We are going to be pulling up our 3rd loop, which is the vertical loop, but at the same time, we're also going to be tacking down our loops from the previous right side row. And we're going to do those with what's essentially a knit 2 together and a slip slip knit, but you always include a loop in there. So in the pattern, it's going to say knit, loop, and stitch together, or slip, loop, slip, knit. So let me show you that. I am also going to show you how to pull up a loop without the knitting needles. Here I am. This is where I want to knit the loop and the stitch together. Okay, so here's my stitch, here's my loop. I'm going to insert the needle so that I have the 2 together and just knit them. that kind of anchors that loop on top of the stockinette. Then I'm going to knit 2, and now I'm ready to pull up my center loop. I might be inclined, as soon as I do that first loop, I might be inclined to take that stitch marker out and just set it to the side, because once you have one loop in that target stitch, you know where you're going. Once you're to the place where you need to pull up a loop, you can insert your crochet hook. So as I pulled that up and I put it on the needle, I'm leaving that loose again because I don't want that to scrunch the stockinette stitch. Again, I'm using my thumb and I'm pressing down with my middle finger on the back to hold that loop in place so it doesn't take up a bunch of, doesn't get scrunched. It's easy to leave slack when you're actually pulling the loop up and putting it on the needle, but it gets tricky when you knit that next stitch, because if you pull this tight with your tension, all of a sudden, see how scrunchy that is? And I don't want that. In fact, I'm going to get rid of that stitch for a second and fix my tension here on this loop. Now I've reached my other loop, and this time I'm going to essentially do what's a slip slip knit. I'm going to slip the loop and I'm slipping it. You know what? Slip that loop purlwise. And then slip knitwise. And then knit them together. Okay, and that gives you that nice flat loop there. Okay, so I slipped the loop purlwise, slipped the stitch knitwise. Okay, the wonders of things you discover when you do video tutorials. The entire time I have knit my section, I have always slipped the loop knitwise, but when I looked at how it was laying here, I thought if I did it knitwise, it was going to twist the stitch, and so that's why I started to tell you to do it purlwise. You may just have to look at it and see how that goes, right? If it looks like it's not going to lay flat, that it's going to twist, then slip it the other way. How's that for being non-specific? All right, so basically, as a review, do this all over again. So if you slip it knitwise, slip the next stitch knitwise, insert the tip of your left needle into both of the slipped stitches, and then knit them together through the back loop. Okay, and see how that lays nice and flat? If I had slipped that, oh, now we're doing all sorts of fun things. Now here it is. If I slip it knitwise this time, see how it makes that little twist there? I don't want that twist there. So here I would be inclined to slip it purlwise. Slip this knitwise, insert the tip of the left hand needle under both stitches, and knit them together. All right, so you're just going to have to eyeball it. Honestly, if it gets a little twisted, it's not the end of the world. I think I have some on one of my shawls that are a little bit twisted, and no one's gonna notice except you if you're looking really hard. But just don't. Just enjoy it. Okay, I am back and I am ready to do my slip stitch, knit them together through the back loop thing. And I just wanted to show you a little more how this is laying. If I were to slip this knitwise like I would do for a slip slip knit, do you see how it puts that twist in the yarn and causes it to cross over? that means that there's going to be a twist in the loop. If you don't want the twist, then instead of slipping that knitwise, you should slip it purlwise. And then slip the next stitch knitwise. Insert the tip of your left hand needle and knit those 2 stitches. Okay, and then see how that's laying nice and flat. Let me knit across here so that you can see that a little bit better. In the long run, it's not going to matter a whole lot. It really depends upon how you wrap your yarn around your needle or crochet hook back when you're first pulling up your loops. The direction you wrap does matter, but sometimes you just wrap in whatever way you can get the loop through because it's a little awkward, especially on the left hand side. This one is super awkward. Okay, so here you can see I have 3 loops and they're all tacked down in the pattern. You'll just continue, you do a bunch of those in a row, and then on the next section they're offset. So that is my Cascades Park Imagination Fountain texture stitch. I hope you enjoy.